Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. I'm going to be reading to you about Saint Jerome today, taken from the Golden Legend by Jacobus de Vergine. Jerome comes from gerar, holy, and nemus, a grove, hence a holy grove, or noma, a law. Therefore, in his legend, the saint's name is interpreted as sacred law. He was holy, firm or clean, or wet with blood, or set apart for sacred use, as the temple vessels were said to be holy because they were kept apart for sacred use. Jerome was holy, which is to say, firm in doing good, by his long-suffering perseverance. He was clean in his mind through his purity, and wet with blood through his meditation on the Lord's passion. He was set apart for sacred use in his exposition and interpretation of the Holy Scripture, or he is called a grove, after the grove where he lived at times, and a law because of the religious rule that he taught his monks, and also because he expounded and interpreted the sacred law. The name is also construed as meaning vision of beauty, or one who judges speech. Beauty is manifold. First of all, there is a spiritual beauty, which is in the soul. Secondly, moral beauty, which consists in propriety of conduct. Thirdly, intellectual beauty, which is the beauty of the angels. Fourthly, supersubstantial beauty, which is divine. Fifthly, celestial beauty, which is the beauty of the saints in heaven. Jerome had this fivefold beauty and saw it in himself. The spiritual in the variety of his virtues, the moral in the propriety of his ways of life, and intellectual in the excellence of his purity, the supersubstantial in the ardor of his love, the celestial in his eternal and excellent charity. He judged speech, whether in his own or that of others, his own by carefully weighing his words, that of others by confirming what was true, refuting what was false, and exposing what was dubious. Jerome was the son of a nobleman named Eusebius, and was a native of the town of Stridon, which lays on the boundary between Dalmatia and Pannonia. While still a youth, he went to Rome and became thoroughly proficient in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew languages and letters. In the art of grammar, his teacher was Donatus. In rhetoric, the orator Victorianus. He labored day and night in the study of the divine scriptures, drawing deep draughts from them, and later pouring out his knowledge in abundance. There was a time, as he wrote in a letter to Eustochius, when he read Cicero by day and Plato by night, because the coarse language of the rhetoric books displeased him. Then, about halfway through Latin, he came down with a fever so sudden and violent that his whole body was cold, and the vital heat throbbed only in his chest. Preparations for his funeral were therefore under way, when abruptly he was hauled before the judge's tribunal. The judge asked him what his profession was, and he professed without hesitation that he was a Christian. "You lie," the judge said. "You are no Christian, you are a Ciceronian, for where your treasure is, there your heart is also." Jerome did not answer, and the judge ordered him to be flogged severely. Then Jerome burst out, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, have mercy on me." The people present pleaded with the judge to pardon the absolvent, who swore on oath and said, "O Lord, if ever I possess or read worldly books again, I will be denying you." Hearing this, the judge dismissed him, and Jerome, of a sudden, regained his strength and found himself bathed in tears, and his shoulders terribly bruised from the flogging he had received at the tribunal. From then on, he devoted as much study to godly books as previously he had given to pagan ones. So I believe they were saying that he was sick and had this dream, but when he woke up, his shoulders had been flogged. At the age of 29, Jerome was ordained a cardinal priest in the Church of Rome, And when Pope Liberius died, Jerome was acclaimed by all to be worthy of the pontifical chair. But he had denounced some monks and clerics for their lascivious lives, and they were so resentful that they began to lay snares for him. John Belleth tells us, for instance, that they used a woman's clothing to create a false impression of him. He got up one morning to go to matins, as was his custom, and found at his bedside a woman's gown, which, thinking it was his own, he put on, and so proceeded into the church. His adversaries, of course, had done this in order to make it look as if he had a woman in his room. Jerome now saw how far these people would go in their insane folly, so he gave way to them and went to join Gregory of Nazianzen, bishop of the city of Constantinople. After studying the scriptures with Gregory, he retired to live in the desert. Later he wrote to Eustochium to tell her about his trials there. How many times, living in the wilderness, in the vast solitude that pervades a horrid sun-scorched abode to the monks, have I thought that I was basking amid the delights of Rome. Tears all day, groans all day, and if, resisted as I might, sleep overwhelms me, my fleshless bones, hardly holding together, scraped against the bare ground. I say nothing about food or drink. Even the sick have cold water to drink, and to have some cooked food was like a sinful indulgence. All the company I had was scorpions and wild beasts, yet at times I felt myself surrounded by clusters of pretty girls, and the fires of lust were lighted in my frozen body and flesh. So it was that I wept continually and starved the rebellious flesh for weeks at a time. Often I joined day to night and did not stop beating my breast until the Lord restored my peace of mind. I even dreaded my cell, haunted as it was with my thoughts. Angry and stern with myself, I plunged alone deeper and deeper into the wasteland, and as the Lord is my witness, from time to time and after many tears, I seemed to be in the midst of the throngs of angels. After leading this penitential life in the desert for 4 years, Jerome went to the town of Bethlehem and offered himself to live like a domestic animal at the Lord's crib. He reread his own books, which he had kept safely stowed away, and other books as well. He fasted every day until sundown and gathered many disciples around him to follow the same holy way of life. For 55 years and 6 months he toiled at the translation of the Scriptures. He was a virgin to the end of his life, or so this legend says, but he once wrote about himself to Pamachius, I hold virginity as high as heaven, not that I have it. In time the saint was so worn out and weakened that he lay on his cot and had a rope hanged from an overhead beam, by which he pulled himself upright to follow the office of the monastery as well as he could. One day towards evening, when he was seated with the brethren to hear the sacred lessons read, a lion suddenly limped into the monastery. The other monks fled at the sight of the beast, but Jerome greeted him as a guest. The lion showed him his wounded foot, and Jerome called the brothers and ordered them to wash the animal's feet and to dress the wound carefully. When they set about doing this, they found that the paw had been scratched and torn by thorns. They did what was necessary, and the lion recovered, lost all his wildness, and lived among the monks like a house pet. By this time, however, Jerome sensed that the Lord had not sent them the lion for the health of the wounded paw, but so that the animal could render them some service. The saint therefore followed the advice of his monks and assigned a duty to the lion. The monks had a donkey that carried firewood in from the forest, and it became the lion's chore to lead the donkey out to pasture and to watch over her safety. And so it went. Once the care of the donkey was enjoined upon the lion, They were constant companions. He guarded her like a faithful shepherd, going with her to pasture and being a most vigilant defender. He looked after his own food, and the donkey went about her accustomed work. But at fixed hours he led his charge home. Then one day, when the donkey was feeding, and the lion fell into a deep sleep, some merchants passed that way with their camels, and seeing the donkey unguarded, made off with her at once. When the lion woke up and did not see his companion, he ran hither and yon, roaring, but did not find the donkey. He went sadly back to the monastery, but was ashamed to go in as usually he did. The monks, seeing him come home late and without his ward, concluded that hunger had made him eat the donkey. Therefore they would not give him his usual provisions, and said to him, "Get out, and go eat what's left of the poor donkey, and satisfy your gluttony." The monks, however, found it hard to believe that the lion had done this bad thing, and they went out to the pastures to see if they could discover any sign of what had happened. But there was none, and they reported the whole matter to Jerome. At his suggestion, they turned the donkey's work over to the lion and loaded the cut wood on his back. The lion submitted to this penitently. Then one day, when his work was finished, he was out to the fields, running to and fro, and hoping to learn what became of his companion. And then at a distance he saw a train of merchants with their load of camels and donkeys leading the way. In that region it is usual, in order to keep the camels on the right track when they have a long way to go, to have them follow a donkey that leads them with a rope around the neck. The lion recognized his friend, and with a terrifying roar rushed upon the caravan and put all them into flight. And then, still roaring terribly and flailing the ground with his tail, he drove the frightened camels, laid as they were, towards the monastery. The monks saw them coming and notified Jerome, who said, "Wash the feet of our guests, dearest brothers, offer them food, and above all, await the will of the Lord." Now the happy lion began to run around the monastery, prostrating himself before each brother and swishing his tail as if to beg pardon for the perpetrated fault, although he had not committed it. Jerome, foreseeing what was about to happen, said to the monks, "Go, brothers, and get ready to provide our arriving guests with whatever they need." He was still speaking when a messenger came to tell him that some visitors were outside and wanted to see the abbot. When Jerome went out to meet the merchants, they threw themselves at his feet, asking his pardon for the wrong they had done. He brought them kindly to their feet and admonished them to take what was theirs and not to usurp what belonged to others. They prevailed upon Jerome to accept half their oil in return for his blessing. Reluctantly consenting, he accepted their offer. Furthermore, they promised that every year the same measure of oil would be given to the monks, and that their heirs would be ordered to continue this practice. In earlier times, there had been no uniformity in the church's office or in the chant. Now Emperor Theodorus, as John Beleth tells us, asked Pope Damasus to charge some learned men with the work of bringing order to the liturgy. The Pope, knowing that Jerome was expert in Greek and Hebrew and supreme in all kinds of knowledge, committed this task to him. Jerome distributed the psalms for the day of the week, assigned a proper nocturne for each day, and specified that the Gloria Patri should be sung at the end of each psalm, as Siegbert says. He also assigned the reading from the Gospels and epistles to be sung throughout the cycle of the year, and put rational order into whatever else pertained to the office, following the chant. He then sent the whole work from Bethlehem to the sovereign pontiff, and he, with his cardinals, gave it solemn approval and established it as standard for the whole church in perpetuity. After that, Jerome arranged a tomb for himself at the mouth of the cave where the Lord had lain. and after living for 98 years and 6 months, he died and was buried there. The reverence in which Augustine held Jerome is plain in the letters he addressed to him. In one of them he wrote to Jerome, "Most dear Lord, worthy to be respected and embraced with the sincerest veneration and love, Augustine sends greetings." Elsewhere, Augustine wrote of him, "The holy priest Jerome, learned in the Greek, Latin, and Hebrew speech, lived in holy places and with the sacred writings in an extreme old age, and by the nobility of his discourse shone from the east to the west like the light of the sun." St. Prosper in his Chronicle says of him, "The priest Jerome lived in Bethlehem, but was famed throughout the world, and served the Church universal with his rare intelligence and learning." To Albigensis, Jerome said about himself, "From childhood on I have tried to avoid nothing so much as the prideful spirit and the haughty head that provoke the wrath of God. Also, I fear all that is too safe. Also, in the monastery, we extend hospitality from the heart, welcome with gladsome countenance all who come to us except heretics, and wash our guests' feet." Isidore, in his Etymology, says Jerome was expert in 3 languages, and his interpretations is preferred to those of others because he is both closer to the letter and clearer in his perception of the meaning, and since it comes from a Christian interpreter, truer. In his dialogue, Severus, a disciple of Saint Martin and a contemporary of Saint Jerome, is held to have written about him, besides the merits of his faith and his endowment of virtues, he was so learned, not only in Latin and Greek, but also in Hebrew letters, that no one dares to compare himself with him in any branch of knowledge. Against the wicked his fight was unceasing, his struggles relentless. Heretics hate him because he never stops attacking them, and clergy hate him because he berates their sinful lives and their crimes. But all good people admire and love him wholeheartedly. Those who consider him a heretic are insane. He is totally absorbed in study, totally in books. He rests neither by day nor by night. He is always either reading or writing. Thus says Severus. As is clear from these quotations, and as he himself has testified, he had to suffer the hostility of many persecutors and many detractors. How willingly he submitted to this persecution is obvious from what he says in a letter to Acela. "I thank God that I am thought worthy to have the world hate me, and prattlers call me an evildoer. But I know how to get to heaven, whether others think well or ill of me. Also, would that for the honor of my Lord's name the whole mob of unbelievers might persecute me. Would that this world would rise up more stoutly and shame me. Only let me be worthy to be praised by Christ and to hope for his promised reward. Welcome indeed and desirable is the trial for which Christ's reward is hoped for in heaven, nor is the curse harmful, which is transmuted by God's praise." Jerome died about AD 398. The end. Well, we have him to thank for translating the Bible, and I really enjoy the story of the lion in the monastery. It's so interesting to me, but I guess where he lived, they had lions. Well, join me next Sunday for another religious reading and Wednesday for something secular, and thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.